everybody. Welcome to a special podcast with somebody I met probably nearly 2 years ago now, Ghulam, at a business event in London. And we both turned up and sort of got a lot from it and made a connection a bit later on when we went to some of the coaching days. And since then, really, we were a bit of accountability partners for a while. We've supported each other in a number of ways. I'm super excited about talking to you about this. So this is Ghulam Fernandes. Ghulam, I'm going to hand over to you. I'd really like you to introduce yourself, because I feel that once you start in the groove of what you do and what you're an expert in, people will go, oh, right. And then we'll take it from there. So welcome. It's great to have you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So as my background says, I am a grief specialist. Did you know that there are over 40 life events that can impact our heart and produce feelings of loss and grief?
40.
I had no idea. I always thought that grief was something to do with people dying and bereavement. And so it came as a real surprise to me. So I just want to share a little bit about how I got into this work, because sometimes people are curious. I had a lot of losses when I was growing up, and sometimes when I list them, it can feel like my life's been an amazing tragedy. And it was a very, very difficult journey. I lost my mum when I was 13, a brother when I was around 30. A year later, my younger sister had a delayed grief reaction, and sadly, she took her own life. A year later, my father, devastated by these losses, became sick and died. And then I went on to have 3 miscarriages. So really, I want to be here today as a beacon of hope, because I know that when I was struggling and stuck in my grief journey, I hadn't realized that actually there is knowledge, tools, and processes that can help you to move forward and get your life back. So I'm now on a mission to really demystify what grief is, how it can impact you, and what are some of the unhelpful and helpful things you can do if you're facing it. But I think the biggest insight for your audience is that grief isn't just about bereavement. That's the important thing. And
I know that when
lots of myths, which we can go into later on, but that's really how I got into this work. I don't want people to be stuck for years struggling, when actually there is hope and there are specific knowledge, tools, and processes that can help you move forward.
Yeah. And I know that there'll be I mean, that's amazing, just the fact that there's 40 different life events that could be attributed to some sort of loss and bereavement, and a lot of us will be. And I remember I trained as a nurture group teacher a few years ago, well, about 7 or 8 years ago now, and that was a big part of that learning, because a lot of the time the children in school who are struggling, there is usually some kind of underlying reason, and for some, not all, but for some, the grief and loss of something is important. And in most cases, it was the loss of a loved one, like a parent or a caregiver. But in other times, it was, family breakup or some other life-changing event at a young age that they wasn't really able to process properly. But what it did for the child's brain was just slow their progress down. And it meant that they wasn't able to access mainstream school in the same way. So in the nurture group program, that was kind of part of it. However, there was a number of, I suppose myself included, a number of people who didn't really understand the impact until I had the training. And there's not a lot of training and education about this. And yet, when you think about schools having hundreds of families, it is highly likely that there are going to be families coming through the school that are dealing with these types of traumatic events in their life. So it seems the right thing to do, the sensible thing to do, to skill people or give people the tools to be able to deal with it at the most basic level, which is, what do you do when you find out about these life events, when they're happening? Either they've happened to yourself, which is one thing. I mean, when we were talking and sort of prepping for, like, what could we talk about, there was 2 clear areas, wasn't there? There was like us on a personal level, but then also us as professionals working with families, working with children. What about if we hear about something that's going on? How do we then cope and support in that way? So it's super interesting.
So I think today let's focus on taking care of ourselves, because particularly as a business owner and as an entrepreneur, if you don't understand what grief is and recognize the symptoms, or understand when you might need to get help, and you're impacted, then it will affect your business and your ability to actually support anyone else. So I think it's always helpful to start off by answering the question, what is grief? So grief is the normal and natural reaction to loss of any kind. And it's the conflicted feelings that you get when something comes to an end or there's a change in a familiar pattern of behavior. And
sorry, Ghulam. So something coming to an end,
or change in a familiar pattern of behavior. So, for example, I've mentioned the number of bereavements I had. So those are examples. But I remember when I was working part-time, and I just felt that I wanted to work in the site that was closer to where I live, because I felt it was time to build into the community. And I made the request and I was granted, and I was very excited. But I remember when I moved, I struggled to settle into the new place. And I hadn't really realized, actually, I was grieving because there was a change in a familiar pattern of behavior. I had built up relationships and credibility, and started projects, and had, certain levels of status and everything, because I'd been there, for quite a long time. So it came as a real eye opener to me that actually grief isn't just about bereavement. Whenever there's a change in a familiar pattern of behavior, there's going to be a sense of loss. So it's the conflicting feelings that you get. So part of me was really happy that I'd been allowed to move, and another part was really missing the people I'd been working with and some of the projects that I was not able to carry on with. So I think sometimes that's a really important starting place. The other thing that's really helpful for people to know is that there is normal grief, and then there's grief where it's, where there are issues that are unresolved. And there are three kinds of things that can lead to unresolved grief, which is really helpful to know about. So unresolved grief can be caused by looking at the situation and wishing things had been different or better, or you'd done more of something. When my sister died through suicide, I remember being preoccupied with all the things I could have done differently. If only I'd taken her with me when I was traveling, if only I had, what if I hadn't gone, and so on. So those kind of unresolved, unfinished issues can be a root of the cause of pain. And then the second one is when there's been a loss of hopes, dreams, and expectations. This can be in relation to relationships, or it can be in relation to your work situation. Maybe you didn't get the promotion you wanted. It can be in relation to all sorts of losses. So the example for that was when I had the miscarriages. I was pregnant with a baby girl, and so I had all these fantasies about how I wasn't going to be outnumbered anymore, because I've got a husband and two sons and not much room for doing girly things. So I built up this kind of attachment to what it was going to be like. And then obviously when I had the miscarriage, that those hopes, dreams, and expectations came to an end. And then the third one is if there is undelivered communication of an significant emotional nature. So an example for that was that my mum, when she was going off on holiday, and we were quite thrilled, actually, because we thought, oh, we'll be able to get up to all sorts of stuff while they're away. But just before she was leaving, I had this sudden urge to tell her I love her and give her a big hug. But then this logical part of me popped up and said, oh, don't make a fuss. There's all these people here who come to say goodbye. She'll be back in 6 weeks.
Yeah.
So I listened to that voice. And so for years, I was preoccupied by the fact that I hadn't delivered that communication. So in any situation where that's going on, that can lead to feelings of loss and grief. And we often talk about understanding what's in your backpack. So it's like we go through life, we have a backpack, and then things happen. And sometimes if we don't have the right knowledge, tools, or processes, it's like we'll stuff it in there and then just try carrying on. But grief is not only negative, it's cumulative, and it doesn't just go away with time. There is a myth that time is a healer.
Mm,
The initial intensity might kind of die down a bit, but because you get distracted with life and get
yeah.
busy with things. But if there are unresolved, unfinished things, then those will not just disappear. They'll sit there waiting to be dealt with. And I love the example that I came across in my training where they said, imagine if you had a burst tire, how long would you have to sit and wait for it to reflate itself?
Mm,
So it's
yeah.
not about time, it's the actions that you take over time.
Do
And taking the right action will then help you to handle it more resourcefully.
It's just
Taking the wrong
reminding me,
actions,
Ghulam. Sorry, Ghulam. It's just
yeah,
reminding
so
me and this is the kind of level that we get in teaching and education. Is that if I'm going to tell you a model that is actually given to us by psychologists to use in school, and it's you might be able to reframe this for me because this was always about time. So it's basically a box, and in the middle of the box is your grief. And when you first experience the grief, the ball is really big and it takes up the whole space of the box. And it was explained that over time, the grief never goes, but the box gets bigger, so it takes up less space. So essentially, they were saying, look, we hold and contain and we can listen, but essentially, it's just about waiting. And that's the education that we get about grief.
yes. And sadly, that is a common myth that
Mm,
we think is true. So we kind of think, well, if I keep busy and if I distract myself, in time it will. So, as I said, there can be an element of, you're growing, you're changing. But
yeah,
I actually, I know this is a bit strong, but I
no, go
feel
for it.
really cross with when I hear about that model,
Mm,
because the reality is it's only staying there because it's unresolved and
yeah,
undealt with. And what a thing to think that that pain is going to be with me for the rest of my life. I'll just adapt to it.
yeah. It seems absolutely
So,
crazy now, doesn't it, to me?
yeah,
Yeah,
personally, I can understand where they're coming from, but I don't personally find it to be a helpful model. I think it's
yeah,
for me, it's about becoming aware of what is it that's unfinished and unresolved that you need to process and resolve so that you can move forward.
yeah.
And sometimes what can happen is that, like, for example, with my mum, because of that unresolved thing of not delivering the communication, every time I thought about my mum, I was stuck on that scene. And I would find myself just replaying that scene,
Mm,
being cross with myself. Why didn't I listen to my heart? Why did I listen to that voice? And it's like I just couldn't get past that.
mm,
But when I got better knowledge, tools, and processes, which helped me to then not only recognize why I was stuck, but then gave me processes for expressing those things, it meant I could reconnect with all the rest of my relationship with my mum. And particularly, I could reconnect with all the fond memories, which I
mm,
kind of wasn't able to connect with.
It's a
And in
massive
fact,
positive. Massive. The pain, the pain's not as painful. Is that what you're saying? And you're able to go beyond that into the nice memories and focus on those.
yeah, the thing is that we have a relationship which can be over a long period of time and it can be full of highs and lows and everything. But when we get stuck with unresolved grief, then it's like we're watching a movie, but it's kind of got stuck on a particular scene, which it keeps replaying.
Yeah.
This reminds me of my son when he was little. He used to watch Postman Pat. And there was a particular scene he didn't used to like. He used to find it very scary. I think he was flying down the hill on his bicycle or something. So what he used to try and do was to fast forward, but he was quite little, so he used to press the wrong button and press rewind. And then and then it would happen again, and then he gets scared and he press rewind. So sometimes unresolved grief is a bit like that, that we
Okay.
keep rewinding to that
Yeah.
scenario. Um, and we keep playing over and over in our head, like, I
Yeah.
should have said this, I should have done that, why didn't I do this, why didn't I do that, etc.
Can I just interject with something? This is, and I don't know whether this would come under
Sure.
grief and loss, Gulam, but you know, like when you've had, maybe it does because it comes under patterns, I think, and
Yeah.
familiarity. When you have those really uncomfortable conversations with somebody that may get quite heated, now either in the
Yes.
workplace or in your personal life, and you go for a
Yes.
walk or you get some space and you're like, oh, I should have said this, I should have said that, and
Yes.
like at that moment it feels unresolved, but then you go back, like we call this rupture and repair in relationships. So
Yes.
you go back and then perhaps, hopefully with a bit of time, you go back and you're not feeling as heated and you can go and maybe say the piece that you need to say and you
Yes.
reconnect, and then it's solved. Is it
Yes.
in that same respect?
Yes. Yes. There is an element of that, that as long as you don't go back to the person and you're just playing things over and over in your head,
Yeah.
maybe you're getting it focusing on blame.
Mm,
Did they do this? Why didn't they
mm,
do that? How could they say this? How could they say that? Why didn't I do?
yeah.
Having the mindset of blame versus outcome can keep you stuck. So sometimes, if somebody, for example, if something has happened, uh, or if somebody has died, for example, you might kind of get really focused on, well, why didn't the doctors do this? Why did this happen? Why didn't that? Why didn't I do this? You might get some understanding and you might fix the blame, but you don't actually change anything.
Mm,
So I often say to people, we can't change what has happened, but we can choose how we respond,
mm,
and whether we focus on outcomes or whether we focus on blame. And I think that can sometimes be really, really helpful. Okay, so for example, if things are not going well in your job, you can focus on the blame. Oh, it's this
mm.
one's fault, it's that policy, it's the government, it's this.
Yeah.
Or you can
Yeah.
go, or you can go, okay, I can't, there are many things I can't change, but what's within my control
Mm.
that will make a difference? What do I want instead?
So Gulam, like
And
when because I think some of this stuff's absolute dynamite, like as in how we can start to really focus on like, that developing that mindset and trying to resolve these unresolved issues. That if it was an argument with somebody like your partner or your spouse or even your children, and you go back and you have that conversation that repairs that relationship and you move on, how do you do that when it's somebody who's passed? How can you have those like resolution solutions?
so in the program that I deliver, we look at all the definitions, we look at all the different myths. I mean, we've talked about time being one of them, but there
Yeah.
are others. And then we give people tools where they can identify all the different losses that they've had, pick one particular relationship that they can then work through. And then we give them tools and processes that help them to identify the stuff that they need to deal with, and
Mm,
then processes for actually completing those things.
okay.
So obviously, we're looking at it in a very quick way today,
Yeah,
but
of course.
the
Yeah.
important thing to know is that by identifying and then having the right tools and processes, you can actually resolve things with somebody who has died.
Mm,
And even with somebody who is alive, we suggest that you first use the tools to manage your emotions. Because if you don't settle how you're feeling about the past, it's difficult to be in the present,
mm,
planning how you're going to move forward to improve things. So I have, I think the biggest benefit for me has been becoming more aware of how I'm feeling.
mm,
And when I start to recognize something doesn't feel right, before I would kind of just brush it aside, carry on. But now I know that each time you brush something aside, it actually sits there
mm.
until you actually process it and deal with it. And then the stack gets bigger and bigger, and then
Yeah.
gets harder. So
Which is
So,
the
yeah.
opposite, Ghulam, of what
Mm.
we're being told in like the education sector. I say it's the opposite. I mean, it might just be that training that I went on, and that's that's it. That's the model that they choose. But you're right. When we sit with issues, they get bigger, right? If we talk about even just general well-being, what are we told to do if something's playing on our mind? We want to try and get it off our mind some way, and whether that's through having, like when I worked for social services, we'd have monthly supervision for that purpose. We can go and talk about what's happening in with our children, with the families that we're working with, any worries that we have. In education, that doesn't quite work in the same way, but perhaps we have ad hoc type things. But in business, as business owners, often it's quite a lonely place anyway. So if you're
Yes,
struggling with moving forward because there's some unresolved grief issues, and they're not going to go away, and they're going to sit with you. Not only are they going to sit, there's potential of them becoming larger. That seems like a reason to go out and try and find some kind of support to move forward, doesn't it?
absolutely,
Mm.
absolutely. And it also reminds you of how important it is to plan and schedule and protect self-care so that
Yeah,
you build up your resilience, because
yeah,
tough times are guaranteed. That's
yes,
life happens.
yeah,
That's not the issue. The issue is how prepared and equipped are you to deal with them.
yeah.
So I often talk about the backpack. And one day I was going to Birmingham for a training, and I didn't want to carry too much in my suitcase because I thought it'll be heavy. So I stuffed more than I should have in my backpack. And eventually the zip broke. The zip
Okay,
broke,
yeah,
and my whole it was just not functional. Fortunately, I
yeah.
had a scarf. I was able to tie it up for an emergency. But it made me laugh because I thought, I tell people, be aware of what's in your backpack, don't overload it,
Mm,
and make sure you've got some good things in there, because the backpack is not the issue. When people go camping, they pack all sorts of life-saving survival things in there, but sometimes we stuff things in there that don't belong in there because we, either we're afraid to deal with it, or we think we
yeah,
haven't got the time or the energy.
yeah.
When that zip
That's
broke, it was just a great reminder that you've got to be aware of how you're feeling, where you're at, and notice things in the early stages and get the help and support that you need.
okay. That's really helpful. I mean, on a personal note as well. I mean, this isn't it is a bit about grief and loss. I fell out with like members in my family for a while, and it was a long time. And actually, those it was about 18 months. Everything in my life around that point was really tough. Like I there was lots of change anyway, but I can just remember just feeling consumed by the thoughts of exactly what you're saying. There's things that's going through my head, like, oh, I should be saying this, I should be doing this, I should be reaching out, logical. And in my heart, it was like, I just want to go and sit with them. My heart was telling me one thing, and my brain was just like stopping it from happening, almost just that stubbornness, as well as just life happening. And it wasn't until the end of quite a tricky something changed. Like, I actually walked away from teaching for a bit, and which was kind of like I say it wasn't quite on my own terms, but I walked away from that, and suddenly that one thing being taken out of the backpack meant I could go and deal with everything else. And then suddenly, reconnecting, it was all positive. Those things that were swimming around in my head, stopping me from doing it, was all my own stuff, not belonging to anybody else. That comes to what you said earlier, Ghulam, that blame, um, playing the blame game, and that was the big thing that was stopping me. And then I think looking at the greater, like looking into the future, what's the greater good? What do you really want to do? I mean, we're all here for a limited amount of time. And in my mind, I was like, I want to go and see my dad. I want to go and see my mum, because I think I read something where, and this is what really prompted it, because when I was off, and I was off school for a little while, about 3 months, and I was doing a lot of reading. I read something where it kind of gives you like the breakdown of how often you see each other, and it's sort of in the beginning, obviously the first 16 years, it's like daily, and then you grow up and you move out, and it goes to like maybe a couple of times a week, and then you get into sort of that mid-adulthood, and you have children of your own. Suddenly it's like once a month you see your parents, and it kind of just goes less and less and less. And I remember there was a passage in there that said, like, if your parents are a certain age and you only see them like maybe once every 3 months, work out, like, this is the average age that people die. Work out how many more times you're going to see your mum and dad. And it absolutely shocked me into, I just need to jump in my car right now. You know, and there's and I've actually used that in a number of ways. I do ground myself in the most morbid of ways. I do think about death in that way as well,
Yes,
and it
yes,
keeps me driven. I'm like, well, what is it that I want to achieve? If I talk to myself on my deathbed, what am I going to be telling myself? What have I achieved? What am I doing? And whose lives have I impacted? That's not often the thing that I
yes,
use, and
yes,
I'm driven in that way. Really, I'm not
yes,
sure whether that's a normal thing or not. It seems to be more normal than what I used to give it, because I never used to tell anybody that that's what I used to do, and now it
right.
seems to be people talk about it along those lines as well. Look, we're only here for a limited amount of time. Let's just go and make the most of it. If there's something stopping you achieving your absolute best, don't sit around waiting for it to get better. It's very
Yeah,
unlikely. Go and
yeah,
work with Ghulam. Go and find somebody that's going to come and
yeah,
help you
yeah.
out, and you're not going to waste any more time. You're going to be going to be the best version of you.
Yes, and I do have a free Facebook community that people are welcome to join, where I can answer more questions, give tips, and there are free guides that can be downloaded.
Yeah.
And particularly for this, where we're looking at some of the common mistakes of when you're handling your grief, then I have got a free guide which you're welcome to
We
post the
are
link.
going to post a link
Yeah.
everywhere, so it'll be in my Facebook group. It'll also be on the YouTube description as well, and anywhere else where I can put it, it will be there, Ghulam. So we'll do the link to the group, and we'll put a link to the free download. And so anybody is looking for that support, or perhaps anybody who's been listening and gone, oh, do you know what? I didn't realize it was this. I didn't realize it was grief. I thought it
Yes.
was something else. I thought I was just stressed. I thought it was just, work and life taking over. But actually, I feel a little bit like this could be me. You're talking to me right now. Is that the best
Yes.
way to come and find you, Ghulam, through your Facebook group?
Yes, and there's
Yeah.
there's information in there about how you can connect with me, and I do offer a free connection call for those who
Okay.
want to explore what I offer and how I work with people. But I think the important thing is to recognize that most tough times um, actually have an element of grief attached.
Mm,
And because people have tended to think that grief is only about bereavement, they haven't been aware. And because they've not been aware, they've been struggling with the emotions, but not necessarily knowing how to move forward.
mm,
And as I said, it's really important to build up your resilience and to have those support networks in place
mm,
so that you do have somebody you can talk to, get perspective. I mean, teaching and running your own business can be very stressful anyway. But if your capacity is limited by other things from your past, sometimes maybe people have been through a heartbreak
mm,
romantically, or there's been a divorce, or there's been a bereavement, or there's been a big move. Sometimes people have moved and they've had to leave behind their old friends and their old
mm,
life. And sometimes people feel they haven't had the recognition that they deserved. Maybe they were wanting to get a promotion and they were overlooked. So there's all sorts of tangible and intangible things that happen.
mm.
Sometimes even things, sometimes people think that because it happened a long time ago, sometimes people say, oh, it's really great what you do, Ghulam. I wish I'd known you 10 years ago. And they're kind of thinking that because it was 10 years ago, it must be sorted. And I say, look,
Mm,
don't you check? Some of it might be, you may have resolved some things, but
mm,
check, that there aren't pockets of unresolved things, which you've got used to the weight of, but actually, once they're not there, you'll have more energy for what you really want to do. I remember I had one client, I mean, it was very sad that she'd experienced some really difficult things in her childhood. But the funny part was that once we'd actually resolved those issues, she said, I've just got so much energy. I just feel like I want to sing.
yeah.
This is really
Wow.
strange.
Yeah.
And
That's
so,
amazing, isn't it? And that's life changing, isn't it? Absolutely life changing.
yes,
Yeah.
it's absolutely life
Yeah.
changing.
Yeah. I mean, so again, if anybody's listening, anybody's watching this, and you feel like that's you, just reach out and start the process, because you just never know. Go and book a call with Ghulam, discover, have a conversation, and just see. If you're sitting there with low energy and you're thinking, actually, it could be linked to grief, go and find out. Change your life.
Yes. I mean, there's absolutely, it's better to know that everything is sorted than to be left wondering.
Yeah.
Because again, being an entrepreneur and a business owner requires your whole focus. Some of the symptoms of grief are where you're struggling to focus, make decisions. It can, as it says on the back, it can impact your sense of peace. It can impact your productivity. It can definitely impact your passion for life, because things that used to give you joy don't anymore. Sometimes people talk about life just seems gray, it's like the color's gone.
Yeah.
And if you had a clear sense of purpose, sometimes it can come like a tsunami and knock you off purpose. So in order to reconnect with your purpose, you've got to, come out of being preoccupied with I should have, I could have, I would have. I recently took on a client who sadly had lost 2 children under very tragic circumstances to rare forms of cancer. And she was left preoccupied with a lot of feelings of regret and feelings of guilt, and very much about, I wish I'd done things differently, or what if this, what if that. Now, the thing is, if you've got that all going in your head and the conversations all going around in your head, it's really difficult to focus on doing life.
Yeah.
Sometimes people can slip into depression and anxiety, and that. But if you become aware and you've got the good knowledge, tools, and processes, you're definitely better able to move forward.
Good. I'm so grateful to have met you and to be able to now have this conversation and share it with people who I know are going to resonate, because if they're not resonating it on a personal level, we all know people who are going through this kind of pattern of behaviors, right? We all know. So perhaps it's even not you listening, but someone else who needs to listen to this. Go and share it with them. Go and connect them up. Share all of the links.
Yes.
And because we do all know people who are like this. If not us personally, you do. Everybody knows at least one person. So we all have now the opportunity to go and change somebody's life now. So let's make that happen. 100%.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Ghulam. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you would like to share?
Well, just one other thing. I've noticed that sometimes in the course we talk about feeling avoidance behaviors, so ways we distract ourselves and numb the pain. So actually, sometimes a client has been referred because they're struggling with alcohol or overeating or other things, but the root cause is actually the unresolved grief. So just be aware that, the patterns you develop as a way of coping, they can help you in the short term, but obviously they're not dealing with the root cause. And so they themselves then can become an addiction and a problem. So just make sure you're practicing self-care, looking after yourself, so you've got more to give other people.
Yeah, absolutely. Ghulam, thank you so much. That was just a wealth of knowledge, and the way that you talk about it and the way that you share your knowledge, I think it just comes across like beautifully for a subject that is quite hard for people to engage with. I think you do it in such a lovely way that I know that there'll be people who wanted to come and like join your Facebook group, get to know you a little bit more, have a discovery call. They will want to do that. So I'm eternally grateful that we've met and our paths have crossed, because now I know that by introducing you into our little community, that we can strengthen the skills and change people's lives there as well. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. And if ever it feels appropriate and people have questions, I'm very happy to do a Facebook Live or something where if people send you their questions, we can answer them.
That would be amazing. Thank you so much, Ghulam. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.